Our final Cabot show this season is Hair. We follow the Philip Glass's 1950s, 60s revolution and stick with the 60s revolution in this show. It was one of the last musical theater pieces to have a great representation on the radio, so a lot of you may recognize the music. The Age of Aquarius played quite a bit when I was even growing up, granted on classic rock stations. But still, I think the music is such an incredible part of our history that it's a show that really we were excited to present. And I felt like it really capped a season that talks about revolution in a way that very few other companies can do. I mean, when you think of a company that goes from Beethoven's Fidelio and ends their season with Hair, we're really talking about a great level of variety and a great conversation on revolution, but in a way that is probably not stereotypical or what you thought you'd get. So from that perspective, I'm excited to have Ray Jivoff directing Hair. It's a show that he's intimately familiar with and truly loves, and his excitement has really spilled over to create an amazing show.
I love working at the Skylight. I consider it my home, certainly. And I think what I and a lot of the people that work here, people that come in from out of town, and the people who are locals who work at the Skylight love the sense of family, the sense of commitment from the whole staff. Everyone on the staff is focused on making the best show possible, and they go beyond expectations to make that happen. Our costume shop, our prop shop, the scenic and paint shops are all working to the max to fulfill the designer and the director's vision and to make the show the best it can be. And that sense of commitment and teamwork is what I've always loved about the Skylight, and I think most people who work here feel the same way. And what excites me about working on Hair is, again, how much I love the show, how important I think the show is in terms of the history of music theater and the history of the USA in the 20th century. I think it's a real document for a specific time period, but because it's such a wonderful work of art, it translates and is very contemporary and speaks to audiences today as well. We're still sending young men and women to war, and we're still struggling with use of language, racial issues, sexual issues, and fulfilling your own destiny. I think all of those things are still things that people are struggling with, and that's what Hair is about. So I'm excited to present that here at the Skylight. It's a kind of show that we haven't done too many shows like Hair. We did Rent a couple of years ago, which I think falls into this category in terms of a rock musical, but a show that is a different kind of structure and kind of tears down the wall between performers and audience. There's going to be a lot of interaction with the performers going out into the house and interacting with the audience, and the unstructured concept of the show itself is not something that we've done a lot of here on our stage, a fairly contemporary and improv-based piece. So I'm excited to present this new form here in the Cabot. The structure of the show, it isn't a linear show where you come in and you're going to meet a cast of characters and then follow them through a linear story with a beginning and a middle and an end. It's a sequence of events. Within those events, there's opening numbers, different characters introduce themselves and different ideas, and then within that rises up these the main characters whose story we're following. It's Claude, who is in high school, graduating from high school, and he's gotten his draft notice. He needs to report to the draft board for his physical, and that's going to determine whether or not he's going to be sent to Vietnam or not, which for today's audience, a lot of people, that's a foreign concept. We don't have a draft anymore, but that idea of conscription, that all young men in the US back in the 60s during the Vietnam War were, by law, required to register for the draft. And that's the storyline. His Hamlet-like decision about whether or not to burn his draft card, which is what the other men in his tribe have already done or are going to do, resist the draft, or is he going to conform to the expectations and follow the law and be drafted? And he's really tortured about which direction he's going to take. So there is that story through it, but the show itself is a sequence of events, not always directly lined up with that basic story. So there are huge moments in the show. There's a huge hallucination in the second act where he's seeing what war might be like or is going to be like, which is combining images from the news and movies, and because back then we actually were showing footage of the war on the 6 o'clock news, which is something we don't do anymore. So that the Vietnam War was really vividly documented for everyone, and so these young people knew what was going on and what they were facing. But what I meant by that improv-based show, there are a lot of scenes and moments in the show and even numbers that are were developed originally with the cast in improv. Meaning they might have an idea like, let's deal with sexuality. How are we going to deal with that in the show? And here's the idea. How about a list of words about sexuality? And the song is pretty early on in the show, and he lists a whole bunch of different sexual acts, and the cast is responding and physicalizing what he's singing about. And the initial production and the initial script was developed through discussion and improvisation, where things were developed with the cast as opposed to being written in a linear way by a playwright. The cast is called the tribe, meaning it's this group of young people who spend a lot of time together. They're not necessarily living all together, but they come together to spend time. The book of the show says they're in the park, hanging out in the park. It's probably the park down on the Lower East Side of New York, because they're definitely in New York City. But the main characters are Claude, who is turning 18 and has gotten his draft notice to report for his physical. And he's trying to decide whether or not, how he's going to respond to that. His best friend and the leader of the tribe is Berger, who is the opposite of Claude. They're polar opposites. Claude is fairly spiritual and much more thoughtful than Berger, who is right on the edge for the most part of being out of control. And there are a couple of times during the show when he is out of control. But he's a really wild and compelling character in his own right, because he's so outrageous and free. And then the third main character is Sheila, who is kind of caught in a love triangle between the two young men. And she's a compelling character because she's very political. We meet her in the middle of a demonstration, and she's the organizer of this demonstration. And throughout the show, she's the one who's really driving them to get organized to burn their draft cards. At the end of the show, they're again pulling together for another anti-war demonstration, and she's the one who's organizing them. So she's a young woman with a real political view, and at the same time, she's struggling with how she fits in with these two young men as a woman, where there aren't any boundaries in terms of sexuality. Things are much freer and less defined in terms of roles. So she's coping with these two guys who kind of like each other, but they also both like her, to put it in a fairly basic love triangle equation. But she has really strong beliefs and feelings that she gets to sing about in some fantastic songs. Well, the show, because it covers so many different issues, because it's not a linear show where it's focusing on this one story, it's dealing with race relations, our own sense of our own purpose. Act one ends with a beautiful song. Claude, the main character, sings a song called Where Do I Go? And he's singing about what's the meaning of my life? Where am I going? How am I going to figure that out? Do I follow this group that I'm a part of, or do I find my own path? And I think that is, on a personal level, one of the main issues of the show. But it also, in the second act, more dramatically than in the first act, where we're really being introduced to the characters and the tribe and their sense of play and how they relate to each other and the world. In the second act, we then move into addressing the war issue and the draft. And I think it really is attempting to, we're reminding the audience to question why war exists, why are we sending young people to war, whose responsibility is that, and when is that going to end? Being in the modern age when we know so much and we can do so many things, fix diseases, we can travel anywhere, we can talk to each other on portable televisions, and yet we can't solve this problem of hating each other because we're different, or needing to control some other culture for whatever reason. So to me, that what the audience is left with at the end is a real sense of seeing these people that they've gotten to know who are so beautiful and human, because they're not perfect, they're not idealized particularly. There's a lot of things in the show that are, that now we can look back and know that it's gonna bite them in the ass. Free love comes with consequences. Drug use comes with consequences. And so all of that is rolled into this show, but we're left with this sense of that there's a better way than certainly the way they were going in 1968 when the show happened, and we're still at it today, where we're still struggling with who deserves help from the government, or what's the government doing in foreign countries and in our own country to give everybody that freedom, that right to be themselves. One question that always comes up about hair is the nudity. For whatever reason, aside from all the other things that are in the show, that's the thing that somehow people know the most about in terms of hair. That's the show that has nudity in it. And oftentimes people ask why it has to be there, and it's interesting to see how threatening it is. Because in the context of the original show, and certainly in the revival and in our show, when the nudity happens, it's a part of the protest. And the nudity is not meant to be sexually titillating. It's meant to physically bare the souls of these young people and to really demonstrate really clearly their humanity. They're demonstrating against the draft and against the war, and they're showing that people are more upset seeing a nude body than they are a dead body. That our culture is willing to send young people off to war, give them guns, but they frequently freak out when a naked body is involved in it. And so the nudity is something that comes as the climax of this anti-draft demonstration, where we want to show these characters at their most vulnerable and their most human and their most beautiful. What's more beautiful than the human body? And that there's nothing wrong with it, and that it's important to value it, and they're just trying to give themselves wholly to this demonstration against violence, and war. So that even though the show has a lot of sexual content in it, and that the characters are sexual, and that there's a number of songs about sex and love and free love, that isn't really the main message in the end. That's part of their culture, but the main message is that we need to value each other and our young people, and that war doesn't make any sense. Our theme, our overriding topic of conversation for the 2013-14 season is freedom and revolution. And certainly Hair, the show Hair is a revolution in itself. It changed the Broadway musical in terms of breaking down walls, bringing rock music and pop music onto a Broadway stage, and bringing up issues in a new way. The dance was different. The racially mixed cast was something fresh and different. The language was new. Hearing some of the words on a Broadway stage was revolutionary, and depicting a part of our culture that was happening right then on the Broadway stage made it so immediate, I think. But it is about revolution. These young people are rebelling against the status quo, against conforming, against the idea of everybody has to be the same, or you shouldn't do this or that, or you shouldn't love this person. And at the same time, all you men should line up and go off to war. They're really rebelling against that mindset of that Eisenhower talked about, the military-industrial complex. That really is something that they're really wrestling with here, trying to rebel against and make a statement about what's important and what does America value. What were they showing they valued in dealing with the Vietnam War? And at the same time, certainly the civil rights movement was going on. So all of the issues in terms of black and white, Native American is also a part of the show. Those issues and those cultures all mixed together, seeing a really different kind of Broadway musical.